Welcome to Redcaps Podcast, a podcast where we dip our caps into the blood of our listeners and we ramble on about old school games. In today's episode, we are speaking with Dan Proctor of Gobliniod Games. As you know, no mortal can outrun a Redcap, so I hope you can sit back, listen, and enjoy. Today's episode is pretty special. We have to have a nice, long, sit-down conversation with Dan Proctor of Goblinoid Games, best known for Labyrinth Lord, and several other smaller properties that maybe you aren't aware of that we touch on briefly. Fantastic conversation. Dan was a awesome person to come onto the show and talk with me. There are a few audio glitches. His internet connection wasn't the greatest, so hopefully you'll be able to hear everything just great. I'll try to clean it up as best as I can. But yeah, it was a fantastic conversation. I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys all think about it. And without too much further ado, let's hand it over to the conversation. All right, folks, I am joined by Dan Proctor, one of the founding fathers of the OSR, best known for Labyrinth Lord, Goblinoid Games. Welcome to the podcast, sir.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
So the world is all excited. The OSR area is super pumped. I was talking with Matt Finch last week, and when I was speaking with him, your name came up. He said he was super excited to see how things go with the new project. He had high praise for. He said Dan makes rules better than I do.
I don't know about that.
And yeah, I think everybody's quite interested to see what the new edition of Labyrinth Lord will look like. Before we get to any of that, though, can you give me a little bit of background on yourself and Labyrinth Lord and Goblinoid for anybody who doesn't know, if they're not familiar?
Sure. So when I got started in this, it was around 2006, and a friend of mine told me about Osric, and Ryan Dennison, who co-wrote Read the Future with me. So that's how I ran into Osric, and then I would say shortly thereafter, I got the idea for Labyrinth Lord and ended up writing it the next year in 2007. But the timing was not great because at the time I was also working on my PhD exams. And so I don't know if it was the best use of my time to be writing Labyrinth Lord, but I did that, and now I'm a professor and trying to kind of balance my time, but I am getting back into the writing, and so hopefully we'll carry on at this point.
Very good. You mentioned that you're a professor now, so obviously the PhD was successful, I assume, then getting through.
Yeah.
Is your field of study in any way related at all to gaming, or is it completely separate altogether?
No, it's totally different. I'm a biological anthropologist, and mostly I do human evolution stuff. I do a little bit of forensics, but not much. I just basically the local police asked me, "Are these bones human or animal?" And I'll say usually they're animal.
So Dan Proctor should be definitely putting out an undead book, and has excellent ideas for things for skeletons, I'm sure.
But I do feel kind of a connection to Tom Mulvey because he did a master's in anthropology, and I think I know who his advisor might have been, and you can kind of see that in some of his writing, I think, where he includes Neanderthals and various other little elements that are kind of from anthropology.
Right. So Goblinoid Games doesn't just do Labyrinth Lord. It owns the rights to a couple other properties, and I've been asked directly to make sure that when I'm speaking with Dan Proctor, I have to ask this question because they said nobody else seems to ask. So I was told to ask about if there are any future plans for any of the pace setter properties like Time Master or Sandman, and there was also a question about Gore that I'll tee up for a follow up here in a second. But yeah, is there any plans for Time Master or Sandman at all?
Only vaguely. I definitely want to return to those products, but for the time being, I really feel like I need to get back into Labyrinth Lord and get some material going that way. I'm only one person, but I may hire out some of the work for other product lines.
Yeah, being a solo dev, there's only so many hands and so many hours to get items done.
I maybe unwisely I got myself into a bunch of different product lines, and it's hard to support each one in a timely manner.
Right. So Gore, I wasn't familiar with it until the person who asked me to ask this to you brought it up to me. But generic old school role-playing engine based off the BRP engine altogether. So very Chaosium like in
Yeah.
its nature. What was the original goal of Gore, and how does it differ from what people know in terms of like Labyrinth Lord and stuff like that?
I actually wrote Gore before I wrote Labyrinth Lord, and really my only goal there was to follow in the footsteps of Osric and produce something that would be mainly just a tool for publishers. At that time, Chaosium, I guess it wasn't as common for them to license out their works, and so I felt like there was a need for that. And then as time went on, I don't know if that need really is still there, because they do license a lot more of their products, and so I didn't really carry on with Gore. It was meant to be pretty generic, not really for any particular genre, even though there's a bunch of spells in there. But I haven't really had any plans to try to make it into a more full-fledged product.
Right. It was a reference document to allow people to create adventures using that engine and that system.
Yeah.
Not necessarily to be a game itself, but more of a reference spot. Okay. And then Labyrinth Lord came out in 2007. I often say it is one of the 4 founding OSR RPGs that go up on the Mount Rushmore, with Osric, Swords and Wizardry, Labyrinth Lord, and Basic Fantasy RPG all kind of sharing those 4 Mount Rushmore spots. How do you see the OSR from what it was when you guys started it to what it is now? Do you pay any attention to it now? Like, I know, like, for example, when I spoke with Chris Gonerman, he goes, I'm vaguely aware, but he he doesn't spend much time looking at the OSR himself. He looks at his own games. Matt Finch said he was a little bit, he goes, it's too big was his answer.
Mm-hmm.
But what is your thought of, like, what was it then and what is it now? And do you pay much attention to the now?
Well, what it was then is a long story I can go into. I'll go into that. As far as what it is today, I'm not really sure either, because I've kind of been out of the loop for a while, and it definitely doesn't seem to resemble what it did in the early days. And I don't know if that's good or bad, but it's just different. When it first got started, there wasn't a lot of demand, I don't think, in terms of paid product that supports old editions. And what little there was, I think, was kind of encapsulated in Castles and Crusades, and even Necromancer Games with their slogan, 3rd edition rules, 1st edition feel. So there was kind of a sentiment that older play was a good thing. But from my perspective, I don't really think the market took off until Gary Gygax died. And really, I feel like that was the main kickstart to the OSR at that time. And 4th edition came along around the same time, but to me, it feels like a kind of secondary, because at that point, then a lot of people came back to the old rules out of nostalgia, which is natural. Somebody who people thought well of, had just passed away, and it's at that time I felt like blogs were a bigger deal. Blogs aren't so much a medium anymore, and you had a lot of different people writing blogs, writing their different thoughts on basically rediscovering the old rules. And then over time, it kind of became more competitive and more commercialized. And I'm not really sure what it looks like today. I'm trying to figure it out. It seems like there are even more factions than ever.
Yeah, I don't even know if I would call them factions. I feel like I've described it several times as waves. So you've got kind of the original games that were attempting to stay either as reference games like Osric, or almost retro clones like Labyrinth Lord and Sword and Wizardry. But then you've got games that were inspired by those games, and then games that have been inspired by the ones that were inspired by that. And so I think you're like 3 or 4 branches off the tree now, of what the source material was that inspired the game that you're reading at any point in time. So that's why it becomes so difficult, I think, to narrow down what is the OSR at this point anymore. It is very large, very nebulous. It's sure. A very big tree with a whole lot of branches instead of a pole like it was at one point.
Yeah, people have been talking about what is the OSR from the very start, so I don't worry about it too much. We didn't really answer it, 10 years ago, and we're probably not going to answer it today.
Yeah, exactly. The one of the nice things that I've always liked about Labyrinth Lord, besides the fact that it's it's my favorite gaming system, BX, it's beautiful in that sense, is the covers. There's always been various covers that came out for the different releases of it. They've all been really fantastic. I know you said you're going into the solo one on this one. Have you partnered with anybody or have put any thoughts behind what a cover might look like for second edition yet?
Yeah, I've got an artist working on something right now, and I'm still not quite sure how it's going to turn out. If it's good, then I'll go with it. Otherwise, maybe I'll shop around a little bit. But I don't want to say anything too specific yet. But basically, the feel I'm going for is to kind of combine old school, but with some of the better capabilities we have now for desktop publishing. When I first got started, I had zero skills for one thing, and the kind of tools that were available to us were a lot narrower, and our options for printing were much narrower. So I'm just trying to bring in, for example, full color interior. But the art, I still want to kind of harken back to the older styles, but also have a modern touch. So it'll be sort of in between, I would say, but leaning towards old school.
And are you planning on doing it it seems to be popular now to have, books have shrunk down to the digest size. And a lot of games have been releasing either in special editions or as their core rules kind of broken the books up, almost like OD&D with separate books. Would you be going as a single edition book again, or going multiple? It seems like it might be simpler for single with shipping and everything, but
yeah, no, it'll be an all-in-one volume. I don't really like splitting them up. Just for me, I think one of the advantages to the original Moldvay books was you only had to worry about 2 books. And then if you drop that to 1, I think it's even better. I just feel like at the table it's easier. Maybe if it was a much larger game, it would make sense to me.
Right.
But as far as format, I'm going to keep it the regular 8.5 by 11. I probably would not split it up unless I were doing a special box set or something like that. But otherwise, no.
And so what will be the is there going to be any adventures or settings coming with Labyrinth Lord second edition when it comes out?
Yeah, I don't know about settings. I've kind of had an idea for one for years that I've never put together. But first, I want to put out adventures, and I've got one that I'm revising right now that's a solo adventure, and then I'll carry on in that direction. Probably maybe solo adventures and then sort of regular adventures.
Is that something that you want to see happen more in Labyrinth Lord, is more of the solo play? Because you see some games like Ironsworn, that was incredibly popular for them, where there's kind of been a resurgence a little bit in solo play, and even solo like actual plays where you can watch somebody play solo on YouTube or listen to it on the podcast. Is that something that you do, and is it something that you kind of want to see as a big part of Labyrinth Lord? I'd
like to see more of it. Honestly, I have trouble with doing solo adventures myself, because I have trouble with the way a lot of them are written. I love the old fighting fantasy stuff, but I feel like there's just too much page flipping, and it kind of pulls me out of it. I went through one of the books, when I was writing mine, and I just wanted to see, well, how many of these choices actually lead somewhere, actually lead somewhere else. And I found that almost half the choices in this one fighting fantasy book were just linear jumps. They weren't branching anywhere. So I don't know if you really need that many, but so I'm trying to reach a balance between meaningful choices, but also enough of a story to keep you interested as you go along.
Right. For me, I've always had an issue with solo play, more of trying to organize how I record it for myself, not so much for sharing it with anybody else, but like how I whether it's journaling it or something along those lines, just coming up with a way of keeping that tracked. But yeah, there's been a lot over the last few years. There's been a lot of tools that have come out and to make the the mechanics around doing it solo very, very easy. So it'd be cool to see some of that built into the, or advice for that given directly in the game system if it's there or anything like that.
Yeah.
One of the other large BX retro clones that's kind of become the mainstay over the last while gets a lot of criticism for in its book for not having like examples of play. They published their book almost as a reference guide, kind of like Osric did. Just here's the rules, and they presented them in a very nice manner, and their books are great. But a lot of people kind of criticize them, say, hey, you've taken some of the flavor of what made Moldvay's voice special in those books by taking out the examples of play and some of those things. Will you have stuff like that in Labyrinth Lord? Will you have
yeah,
or is the expectation that anybody who picks up Labyrinth Lord, hey, you've played an RPG before, go grab your dice and go?
Well, I mean, realistically, that's probably true. But I've always had an example of play, which I think I've edited it, but I haven't really changed it substantially, so that'll remain. There are also the section for designing adventures walks you through just a little bit about how to create an adventure. So those kind of things will stay. I definitely don't see Labyrinth Lord as just a rules reference. I want you to read it and enjoy reading it. Enjoy the art, enjoy the way things are written. I don't, it's kind of a balance between organization and brevity, but also a little bit of flavor.
Why do you think BX and I guess to a certain extent OD&D as well are so attractive to folks in the OSR sphere of that they're basing their own games off of those games in the matter, or I guess depending on how you read the license, you can't directly answer that. But how do other people why do other people keep their games so close to those source material games, do you think?
Well, I think the basic expert rules are really the way most of us played. When I was playing, and we started with basic D&D, but we also brought in first edition rule books, and we didn't even know that there was a difference. So we would just use them both at the table, and we ended up defaulting to more of the BX, easier ways to do initiative. You don't worry about weapon ranges, or reach as much, and speed factors or that kind of thing. And I think it's just much more open for creating material.
Yeah, I've always looked at it and said it strikes the right balance between simplicity, but there's enough there that that you can see a progression, and there's enough game there that it's a game, but not so much that you're constantly looking at the rule book, or
right, and it's easy to tinker with.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, I'm just adjusting something. I've got a dog whining in the background.
Yeah, no problem. Mine's outside right now, so I may hear him scratching at my door at some point. What kind of dog do you have?
Well, I've got a Portuguese water dog. He's the young whiny one, and then I've got an old lab.
Very good. I've got a little corgi who's just a bundle of energy, and likes to just chase everything in the backyard until he's tired. So with everything that happened here over the last while, like you said, you kind of removed yourself from everything. You said in your public post there, you mentioned that you had kind of drawn yourself from social media, pulled away from everything, focused on what you're doing, kind of gave yourself an ultimatum.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something you'd suggest to somebody in terms of like unplug everything, go off in a dark corner and write until your fingers bleed and come back out when you're done? Or was that just kind of the right thing for you at that moment in time?
Yeah, it was just kind of the right thing for me. I've been struggling, with maintaining the interest and motivation, but yeah, I did release a few things over the last several years, but definitely not what I would like to have done. But now I've gotten to a place where I kind of feel like I'm getting back to normal, and it's a great time to jump in. I kind of wanted to just challenge myself to see, is this something I really want to do, or do I just like the idea of doing it? And then I found that I was able to produce something, so I'm gonna run with it, see where it goes.
So with the whole, whether it be work-life balance or just general life stresses, a lot of folks in our space don't really talk about, if they're feeling mentally drained or if there's mental health issues or anything like that. Like if it's just like, I need a break. Like very few people in our hobby talk about it, but a lot of people kind of will make a joke about it to the side about how gaming is a little bit like therapy for them. And I can see that. I can see people being able to, detach away from everything that's bothering them in their life and sink themselves into an hour or 4 hours of gaming and escape it all. Is there anything that you would kind of throw out for, like, just as general advice for anybody who's kind of going through something like that and that's in a creative spot? Like how kind of coming through it yourself, you're saying you're starting to feel like you're back to normal. What sort of steps should somebody else take if they're in something like that?
It's such a personal thing. I'm not sure. All of us struggle with different things, and we're all on our own time frame. I've been really trying to get back into the groove for a couple of years, but I just could not do it. But then I felt a change now, and I think basically it's just time. If you've got things going on, you need a little time to separate from that. I have an anxiety disorder as well, so there are certain triggers for that, but you got to do what you can to look out for yourself first, and try not to put as much pressure on yourself, maybe. But I think if you can kind of take on an activity that's related to it, but is low pressure, and maybe that can kind of help. Right.
Yeah, I think everybody talks about the, if you do the thing you love, you never work a day in your life, but that is complete bunk. In my mind, if you turn the thing that you love into work, and can quickly become the thing that you don't love anymore. So you have to find that right balance and make sure that it's staying fun as you go through. The game itself, when it launches, I assume you're going to do it through Kickstarter?
No, I'm doing it outside of Kickstarter.
Oh, very nice. So it's going to be when it launches, it'll just be available in general availability, or it'll be done.
Yeah.
Oh, very nice.
It'll launch. I think I'll just launch it on TTRPG. All at once. I think just the PDF and print edition all at once, and I'm not sure yet if I'm going to release the adventure that I'm working on simultaneously or just a little bit after. It kind of depends on how my editing on that goes. I found that I need to rewrite about a third of it. I wasn't happy with it. And I've been grinding away on editing Labyrinth Lord for the second edition.
So is there, besides, you mentioned you're going to try to modernize some of the layout and a couple of the rules. Is there big fundamental changes to Labyrinth Lord, or is it at its core still BX, but just some smaller tweaks at this point now?
It'll be pretty much the same. Basically, there were a lot of things that I did when I was writing it to avoid the perception that I was reproducing art. And at that, when I first wrote Labyrinth Lord, there weren't a lot of other examples out there besides Osric, and it wasn't really clear how far we could push the borders. So to be on the safe side, a lot of us would just change things here and there, change some numbers, try to make an algorithm where there might not have been in before. But the result of that produced some kind of wonky numbers. So I've never been happy with the way experience points progress for the player characters. So those numbers are going to go back to be more in line with BX and generating treasure also. But for the most part, everything else is going to be the same. It still has more monsters, more treasure, more equipment than original BX.
Yeah, that was something that both Matt Finch and Chris Gotterman mentioned, was that at the time there was a lot of anxiety and tension around how the legality of things would work. How far can we push this license before the 10,000 pound gorilla comes and smacks us for it?
I lost sleep. No joke, I lost sleep over it.
And nowadays, like there's a lot of games that I think are playing almost too fast and too loose with some of the rules where, they've, I think it was Chris that mentioned, he goes, some of them aren't even reading the license that they're slapping at the back of their products. And, like they don't have their own, he goes, the simplest, I think he said the simplest way that he can discern if somebody has read the license or not is when he goes through it, if they don't list their product name separately inside the license, which I guess is one of the terms. I haven't read the license, so I'm just as guilty as anybody else, but I don't make anything, so I'm allowed. Yeah. And he goes, he can tell that they haven't read through it properly. So do you think it's at a point now where, because of how ubiquitous the OSR has become and kind of the current rights owners having got their own different set, the game is almost different now for them versus what these older sets are running from. Do you think there's ever a chance where we're going to see somebody get made an example of it or this, or is it they're fine with it as long as it doesn't get pushed like to the ridiculous point of using, their actual monsters or something like that?
I mean, who knows really, right? But I think at this point it would probably have to be something pretty egregious, because there's been so much water under the bridge, over the last 15, 16 years. Where would they even start? I mean, there's a whole bunch of material built off of other material with the OGL, and yeah, it'd be quite a task, and also it would be, I think, bad for PR. So I'm not sure, but the other thing too is, as far as I know, they've never really gone after anybody for violations of the OGL per se.
Yeah, I haven't heard of anybody who's ran afoul of them with it either.
And I don't know if they would have any interest in that really, but you can see all the time people mess that up, the licensing, like you say, or they add their product, but they don't add all the products from the products that they're building off of, because it gets to be a long list and they don't want to bother, but you have to.
Right.
It's part of it.
So what do you play? Or do you get a chance to play much anymore? Because like you said, you've been heads down for a little bit. Do you still get to play on a regular basis? And if so, what are you playing?
Well, lately I have not. Before COVID hit, we had a regular group with James Mishler and some other people. And then COVID pretty much shut that down. So since then, I have played a little bit here and there, but we haven't had a very regular group. But when we do play, we play Labyrinth Lord.
And have you been playing? Did COVID force you online with your gaming much, or are you still doing it mostly in person? Like you took a break and then you're back now in person type idea, or?
Yeah, mainly just in person. Through the darkest times, I guess you might say, of COVID, I wasn't really in any shape to socialize at all, and I was teaching from home, and I was just kind of a hermit. I don't even know if I left the house for weeks at a time.
Yeah, yeah, you're not alone there. I mean, it was here in Canada. Our lockdowns. I live near Toronto, and we had some of the most just insanely strict and long running lockdowns. So yeah, there was a lot of us that became very comfortable in our homes, and it I mean, it's still an adjustment now. If I go any place that has a large crowd of people, I'm just like, oh yeah, this is different. And I've never been one to really enjoy that either. So it is a difference there for sure. Do you plan, speaking of crowds of people, if this comes out in early next year, do you plan on kind of doing the tour of conventions type of deal, like
Sure.
North Texas RPG Con and stuff like that, and bringing it around to everybody?
Yeah, I'm not sure what my convention schedule will be, except that I am going to attend GaryCon in the spring. So I should have, at the very least, the core rules and one adventure ready to go. But I think for my convention attendance, at least in the beginning, I'm going to focus on ones that are the most productive, because I found that a lot of times when you go to a convention that isn't really geared towards old school stuff, it's a lot harder to talk to people, and it doesn't end up being viable as far as expenses go. So I kind of got to pick and choose. But GaryCon is probably the crown jewel of those. If there's not a single place that's better, probably, for bringing people together with that interest.
Yeah, I would say as far as OSR, so part of my reason for asking that was also just to try and pick your brain on cons, because
Yeah.
I've only gone to a couple of small cons near me. I've not gone to any of the larger cons at all. It was on my plan to start touring around the US a little bit this year and do this, but at the very beginning of the calendar year, travel between Canada and the US was still very questionable how things would work. So put it on hold for this year. 2023, hopefully get down there a bunch more. And so as I've been asking people, the ones that everybody seems to mention is Gary Con, North Texas. There's Shire Con up in the Northeast as well. I think it's in Connecticut or something. Those seem to be like the biggest OSR centric, or the AD&D BX centric cons. So if those are all on your list, then I think you'll be well spent there. I think those are probably more my speed as well. Gary Con gets to be a little bit big. I have no intention of going to like any of the hundreds of thousands of people or thousands of people, tens of thousands of people at a convention.
No,
seems too big for.
No, I don't think I could handle Gen Con.
Yeah.
No.
So what is the, if you had to say one thing that you are most excited about this, is it the game itself? Is it the process of kind of getting stuff going and relaunching Goblinoid? What is the aspect of all this that's the most fun and interesting to you as things have been going?
Right. Well, for me, it's more personal. I think I enjoy writing. I enjoy imagining the world and going somewhere else sort of as you're writing. Just creating is what I find exciting. So, and yes, it's interesting to revise Labyrinth Lord, because as I read through it, I'm thinking, I'm looking at what I wrote, 15 years ago, and I'm like, oh my God, I need to fix some of this language. So that's nice. I like the opportunity to get that kind of in better shape, but really the core rules are only the beginning, and once they're in place, then my goal really is supplementary material. And I feel like too many people will take their core rules and slice them and dice them and resell them in various formats, and that kind of becomes their main thing. And that's not really what I want to do. I want to have a good solid game in the background and then continue to come out with support material.
When you say support material for it, would you be staying mostly in the fantasy realm, or would you jump to other genres? Like, would there be a Labyrinth Lord that's more sci-fi based or something along those lines, or would it stay pretty much fantasy and just different?
Well, I already have, sort of Starships and Spacemen is science fiction based on those rules. Apes Victorious is like a Planet of the Apes kind of thing. So I already have, and Mutant Future. I've kind of spun out different genres of that. Yeah.
So would we see kind of those updated as well, kind of following along in lockstep with the fantasy counterpart with it, or are they written well enough now that they're kind of compatible enough and there isn't a need to go back to them right away?
Yeah, I don't think there's a need to go right back to them. I might adjust some of the numbers here and there, but for the most part, I think they're in pretty good shape. But where I may have based saving throws or experience progression on Labyrinth Lord, I might want to revisit that and change the numbers around a little bit. But other than that, I think they're pretty good.
I like asking people about what tools they use. So when you're writing, what is your environment like when you're sitting down to write? Are you in like a Microsoft Word? Are you in a desktop publishing application? Like, what is it that you're spending a lot of your time in?
Yeah, I used to use an ancient version of Microsoft Word, and I finally have a computer that isn't really compatible with my old, I think it was like 2006 or something version. So I'm trying to get into open source software as much as possible. So I've switched away from that, and I use LibreOffice for the writing. I'm learning the ropes of Affinity Publisher for the desktop publishing component. I used to do all my desktop publishing in Word, and if that wasn't a pain in the ass, man.
Affinity Publisher is great.
What's that?
I said Affinity Publisher is fantastic. Their entire lineup, as far as being cost effective and quality enough to be an actual strong competitor to Adobe, they're great. So I highly recommend them as well.
I use Inkscape for vector type images, and then for a Photoshop replacement, I've been using an ancient version of that, which also doesn't work on my newer computer. So I've kind of been jumping between Krita and GIMP. I haven't really mastered either, but trying to get there.
Yeah, I've had GIMP forever. Krita, I tried once. I got a writing tablet with some dreams that I would practice digital artwork, and I can barely draw a stick man, so it was kind of a waste. But but I've had GIMP for years, using that as a Photoshop alternative. I've only recently kind of set GIMP aside and started using the Affinity product more often, because it does most of what I need. But yeah, GIMP is great, again, as an alternative to Adobe products. Adobe products are great, but they're just incredibly pricey. So I think it's always nice whenever you can hear ways that people can get into this at a very low cost barrier to get out and start creating stuff.
Sure. And I avoid subscription plans as much as possible. I hate doing that. I guess it's the new thing, but
yeah, it's to the point where there's a lot of people that are wondering whether or not you'll see that become the future of a Wizards version of D&D. Whether or not it'll end up becoming a subscription model. So yeah, it is kind of as things have moved online, and as the way to monetize things has changed, that could be a future that's possible. Hopefully not, but I'm sure those who enjoy those games will find a way to, maybe they'll have their own OSR movement for that as well, and bring stuff around. Maybe. So when
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I was reading somewhere I forget where it was a few days ago, and somebody had mentioned that they grew up playing Labyrinth Lord. And I thought, oh my God, it's been out that long. And people talk about how they grew up playing 3rd edition, or even, I guess now, 5th edition. And but so yeah, I mean, what we think of as nostalgic is changing in generations. It kind of makes me wonder, how are we going to recruit more young people back to the older version?
Yeah, I think it's got to be a matter of, like, one of the things that I've tried to make sure that I'm doing, especially during this month, but in general, I try to do it across most of my episodes on the podcast, but definitely during this month, where we've been trying to highlight the positive of the OSR, is to not do it in comparison to the newer games, to not say, hey, these newer games do something bad or wrong, because I don't think they do. I think they're just different. It's a different set of rules. It's a different vibe that they're going for with the game. So I think it's more about just trying to show, hey, this is what this era of gaming did really well. So that's why I'm always on the lookout for really good adventures that show things. Or one of the things I've been kind of shaking the tree a little bit, and I've had a few people respond to me. Hopefully I'll be able to have a bigger conversation about that in the near future, but is settings. Is that I kind of look at it and say, there hasn't been a whole lot of really great original world scale settings put out in the last 20 years or so. Like, a lot of the stuff that I look at as far as being, the gold standards for those were all products of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Which is weird whenever we live in an age of, super collaborative internet access and free tools and wikis and stuff like that. You would think that there would be all the tools available for a group of people to sit down and create a collaboratively really cool world. I kind of mentioned that to Chris Gunnerman, because I look at his project there with Basic Fantasy as being an open source game, essentially, where he's got, the forum comes together, everybody collaborates, they edit all internally, and then he puts out the product. And I was like, I view his as very similar to an open source project. And I was like, what do we need to get that for a setting? And he was like, you really need to have, somebody who's got the leadership on what they want, and then just people that are passionate about it. And so, yeah, I'm definitely not the person to take up that torch, but I'm hoping at some point somebody does and tries to gather a group of people and say, hey, we're going to make this world, and everybody come and pitch a little bit in, and I think it'd be really cool. With you being out of the kind of the OSR sphere for a little bit as you kind of disconnected yourself out and put your head down, and everything else is going on in the world because it's been a crazy world.
Yeah.
As you're coming back, sticking your head back up, has there been anything in the area that you're like, oh wow, why didn't we think of this before? Or has there been anything that's been really surprising from, not maybe from a specific game or an adventure, or just in general of the movement that you, or community, whatever you want to call this group of people that like old school games?
Wow, that's a tough one. I'm not sure I've poked around enough to have enough examples. But on the surface, I know we're not talking about drama, but on the surface, there's always been that in the OSR. It just seems that that's continued on. But I think it's more commercialized right now than it ever has been. And that may be good, it may be bad. I think it's kind of good in a way because it does raise the standard for what you produce. You can't just slap something together in Word and put it up anymore. Or you could, but I don't know if you want to. Yeah, I'm not sure. As far as anything totally different, I think maybe I'm not around enough yet.
Right. I agree with you that it's definitely become commercialized. I kind of view that as the wave that we're in right now, is that we're in kind of the commercialized version of the OSR, where instead of things appearing on blogs or on forums or on Google Plus or any of the other common meeting areas that the OSR used to centralize around, products are now often seen for the very first time as they hit Kickstarter or Itch or wherever it is they're being published out of. So the very first time you see it is when somebody's asking for money for it, as opposed to before, where there was a lot more of a group setting and debate and stuff like that around it.
Yeah, and when things first got started, I remember people talking a lot about how terrible the market was for old school stuff. Back in, I guess, 2007, 2008, maybe, sales were very low for everybody. And it really wasn't until the OSR got sparked, I think, with the death of Gary Gygax, that started to change. And now you look at it today, and you've got people, with Kickstarters over hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's just a whole different world.
Yeah, the dollar value on the Kickstarters in the RPG space in general, not just the OSR space, but going back a few years there when his name just escaped me, MCDM, Matt Colville, when he did up his Kickstarter in the RPG space for his product, and it came out like over $1 million or something in just a few days, and it's like, wow. There's been some crazy results from there. Yeah. With everything that's coming out, there's no way for me to have possibly answered any questions that you may have previously had in your head that you were expecting me to ask. So is there something that you would have liked me to ask for you to talk about? Or is there something that, if our roles were reversed, that you would want to hear asked of somebody who's coming back and releasing kind of an iconic product like this? Like what should people know, or what would you like to tell people in general?
That's a hard question. What do I want to tell people? Wow. I think that the thing that most people want to know is, am I making any major changes? Which we've kind of talked about already, and which is not the case. Is Labyrinth Lord going to retain more of its own flavor? I think the answer to that is yes. It's never been an exact replica, because I always felt that, as great as the original rules were, they were kind of limited. You don't play very long, and you've already exhausted a lot of the options for monsters and spells and magic items and that sort of thing. So I brought a lot more of that in to kind of increase the length of playability, and that's all going to stay.
Very good. One of the last questions I'll ask you, I haven't asked anybody else this, and I just realized I haven't, and I should have been. But I'm a huge fan of monster books. I'm a sucker for it. I try to hold restraint on buying new rule sets at this point, but monster books, it's like, oh well, I got to get that now. What is your favorite monster book, and also what's your favorite monster?
My favorite monster book. I think, gosh, I can't remember the name of it now. There was one put out many years ago that had kind of variations of standard monsters, and it was written for Ostrich, I believe. I wish I could remember the name of it. That one was pretty interesting. But in terms of the whole scope, I think Necromancer games and Frog God games with their Tomb of Horrors, those are probably my favorite. They're just monsters, and there's just so much material in there.
Yeah, Tomb of Horrors and Tomb of Monstrosities. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Tomb of Monstrosities. I think that's a great one. I think that's probably up in my top 2 or 3 as well, if not my favorite one. I wish he would reprint that, but it's such a huge volume. I guess it becomes not tenable to actually print again. But
and monsters are hard. Coming up with new monsters is really hard.
It is. We've actually been having a couple of the other podcasts I listen to. We've been calling in and having discussions back and forth, and there's that never-ending talk about players bringing their knowledge of the game in from the outside world into the game and giving their character an unjust advantage or something by knowing that the troll is weak to fire or something like that.
Yeah.
But there's been discussions around like just stop using the monsters' names and use descriptions and modifying them and stuff like that. I mean, it's things that have been discussed since early Dragon magazine days and what have you. But
give them maybe some different unexpected abilities. Different capabilities that you might not be expecting. That's always a good way to keep people on their toes.
Yeah, it's been fun for me over the last little while. I managed to find a way to read a lot of the old Dragon and White Dwarf magazines, and from a nostalgia value of not even like so much like the articles in the magazine, but nostalgia value of going through like the ads and the letters to the editor and stuff like that. Going through the letters to the editor, it's kind of hilarious how much the discussions have not changed. They're the exact same questions. They're the same gripes and arguments and nerd sniping that was taking place in the 70s and 80s as there are today. So much like how you said earlier in this conversation, where you said there was no consensus on what the OSR was back then, and you're not surprised that there still isn't one now.
Yeah,
because it just holds true with everything else in the hobby as well. Is that the same debatable points are still the same debatable points.
Yeah. Well, I think there are a few things though that we all can agree on, and one of them is that it makes creativity more democratized. You don't have to rely on publishing through one entity, and have gatekeepers. I think that's one of the best things, and that lets people put out there what's on their mind.
Yeah, having the ability to publish very inexpensively without having to have a big overhead cost to you, especially now with print on demand options, like it's a very more accessible way to get into things. The problem I find, I often say that we're in the golden age of RPG stuff right now, because there is more content made every day and published every day than any of us could ever consume. But the problem is finding things. I've lamented in the past that I make this statement every once in a while, and then it lasts for like a couple of weeks where I'm like, okay, I'm done buying rule sets. I'm not buying any more rule sets. I have 5 different BX clones. I've got all the different games that I like. I'm going to play the games I like. And then somebody comes out with something new and I buy it. But I do wish there was a way that there was almost like a search engine where I could go to and say, hey, I'm having a problem with the Thief, and show me everybody's different revision of the Thief, of the 80,000 different ways, rather than having to pick through this person's BX clone that they changed the Thief in, and this person's BX clone that they changed the Thief in. Go through that way. So like discoverability seems to be the big issue now, like just making sure that your name is known and you're able to be found. Is that with Labyrinth Lord having been out of the public site for a little bit, although it never stopped being played, is that any of a concern to you at all in terms of like keeping the marketing side of it, I guess?
Oh, sure. I think, because there hasn't been really any support for it from me for so long, a lot of the support I used to enjoy has also kind of tapered off, and I don't blame people for that. So I think the challenge is to kind of reestablish trust in the product. That's really important. And the other thing that's important is the community. The way we do things now, I don't feel like you can really have a successful product unless you have a community around it. Because, how do you, people who are going to create all these variations of games, there's always a question, how do you distinguish yourself? And from my perspective, it's pretty hard to distinguish yourself in a way that, where you could argue, well, I made up this rule, so my game's better, or this or that. I think the thing that is decisive is the community. So the more you can build that community, I think the better off you are for name recognition and getting the word out.
Yeah, I agree there. I think it's having a group of people behind you, and helping out with it. So I guess as a general question, following up with that, then again, you operating most of this solo, what can those who are big fans of the game do to help? Like, what can if I'm coming to you, say, hey Dan, how can I help out make this a success for you? What sort of things are you looking for from folks, or what can they do to help you out at this point?
Positivity just goes a long way. There's in all aspects of life, there's always naysayers, and gamers are no different. And so, positivity is great. I think spreading the word is great. If you're excited about the game, talk about it. If you are a publisher or you're thinking about publishing, that's another great way to support the game. And in return, I will also help support and advertise for them. Those are all things I think that apply. In
the last long while, one of the reasons I've always been pushing to try to get some sort of a definition of what the OSR is, even though it's a futile experiment. Part of my reason for doing that is that when somebody sees OSR on the front of a book, that they would have some sort of an idea of what it actually is. And to a certain extent, with for the newer edition games, you'll see 5e compatible written on a book, and you kind of, okay, I know what that is. For the longest time with Labyrinth Lord, there was a lot of stuff that people were publishing, and they weren't labeling it as OSR; they were labeling it as Labyrinth Lord. And you've seen the same thing to a smaller extent with Osric as well. Is that something that you're hoping to continue, where folks will be able to slap the Labyrinth Lord logo on? Is there like a specific is there a stringent rule thing that has to go through that, or is it pretty easy?
I've always had a license, pretty open license, and that will continue. It doesn't require any oversight or screening or anything like that. It's pretty boilerplate stuff. I just don't. I just wouldn't want to see things put out there controversial for the sake of it. To just keep in mind that these products are for a wide variety of people, of all ages, really. So I would just hate to see something out there and get published. But otherwise, it's a free license, and it's pretty easy to use.
Awesome. So yeah, for me, I'm kind of, without spoiling it for anybody who might be interested to see what my conclusion OSR October is going to be, my feeling has been more that I think I'm looking to see products that come out with, it's BX compatible or it's Labyrinth Lord compatible. And I think that it will end up being more useful to me for what I'm looking for from an OSR definition.
I agree. I don't like the OSR logo as such as it is, because it isn't very specific. If people follow your products, then they kind of know what you mean by it. But yeah, there isn't a universal, this is the rule set for the OSR. I mean, from my perspective, other old games could be OSR too. Like old versions of Elric or Stormbringer, and in the Chaosium family, or any number of other games.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff that fits into the old school games. I think it was just a lot of us had the OSR in specific seemed, because of the the 4 games that came out that started all of it were all the early TSR era games, and that kind of locked a lot of people's viewpoint there. But yeah, I'm a big fan of like the Fantasy Trip, Steve Jackson games as well, coming out in a similar era. I probably wouldn't say that's an OSR game, but it's definitely an old school game. It's definitely a game that has that same feeling and came up from that same time period.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's one of those things that I'm more looking at it from a cover of a book standpoint of how does somebody who, I've got a 5e friend and they're looking to go explore something and they see OSR on the cover. Do they know what that's going to be? And
no, I don't think so.
So that's why I think it would be really, really awesome if we start to see more products come out with, say, a Labyrinth Lord logo on it or something along those lines where
Sure.
we know exactly what those are, or we have a good idea of what those will be when it actually hits the table.
Yeah, I agree.
So you're currently going through and getting the web page and everything back up and running. Is that going to be kind of a in between editing and creation standpoint?
Yeah.
And hopefully that gets ready to go fully in early in the new year type as well.
Yeah. I just have basically kind of a holding page for the most part at the moment. I've been focused on other things. I'm thinking about hiring that out rather than trying to do it myself, just because of how time consuming it is.
Yeah. There's a lot of tools that can make it really easy, but you can also goof stuff up if that's not your area of expertise. So it's almost got to be like, if you can afford it, be like, yeah, go take care of this and put up a small page for us. And I guess you'll be able to handle the print on demand. Is it going to be specifically through drive-through, or would it also be Lulu or anything else that you've got in mind as well?
Yeah, it'll be drive-through and Lulu. I'm also investigating some other options, but the main problem with other options is you have to direct people there, from your own advertising or website, which can be very difficult. And to get people to create a new account with a different distributor, it's just a lot easier to stick with drive-through because it's the industry leader and that's where people go. And also Lulu, I think, got a step in to that early on because it was one of maybe the only option really when the OSR started, if we call it whatever we call that. Lulu was one of the only options for print on demand, and then when drive-through instituted it, then I think a lot of the business shifted there.
So what's the best way to describe what the feedback's been like coming back since you've launched that public post and you've been like, hey, we're coming back? Has it been mostly very positive? Has there been what has been the resounding question, or have I hit all the resounding questions?
I think you've hit the questions. I think overall it's been a pretty positive response. You always have people that are really entrenched in whatever they're doing at the moment, and for whatever reason they feel threatened when something else comes along. So I think there have been some comments that I think are coming from that place, but overall, yeah, I think it's been positive, and I'm just need to be present. I
think that's something that all of us should strive for, is just to be present at times. Yeah. It's very easy to pull away, especially depending on what parts of the internet you happen to be swinging around in. So I do thank you very much for coming onto the show. It's been awesome to talk to you. Where should everybody go to find updates on when things will be coming out and how the progress is going and everything along those lines?
The source probably for more up-to-date information will be on the Labyrinth Lord 2E Facebook group.
Okay.
And because I'm not sure how soon I'll update my webpage, but that'll be the most up-to-date information.
Okay. All right. I'll include links to all those down in the show notes for everybody to come and find it and follow along on there. And yeah, like you said, there won't be a Kickstarter, so when it launches, everybody can just grab it and go.
Right.
Is there going to be will it launch only as the PDF and print copy, or will there be a free art-free version or anything along those lines as well at the same time?
Yeah, there will be a free art version, and maybe some other approaches too that I talk about later.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. Like I said, for me, this is kind of like I've completed the Mount Rushmore now. I've talked to the creators of all the 4 original games. You've all been awesome to talk to, and you've been so giving with your time. And I realize it's been
a crazy week and everything. Everybody has had different maladies and stuff. So I appreciate you being able to bounce around the schedule a little bit with me and get this call in.
Sure. Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate the invitation.
All right, folks. So I'm going to pass this up to future me that's doing the editing. But yes, check the description for all the links to all the things.
All right, folks, that wraps up this episode of the Redcaps Podcast. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. It was so much fun to speak with Dan. Dan, thank you for coming on to the show. And I hope everybody learned something, they enjoyed it, and they're eager to come back for more. www.theredcaps.net has all the links to all the ways to contact me, and the show notes will have all the links for all the ways to contact Dan. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, never let your caps dry out. Stay safe, have fun, we'll talk again soon.